What if a single object could change the course of your entire life? A small, worn medallion, 2 broken halves, and nearly 3 decades of silence. That's all it took to uncover a truth that had been buried by time, tragedy, and the best of intentions. In today's story, we return to Elena and Grayson, 2 strangers, unknowingly bound by blood, reunited not through chance, but through fate. As a young boy recovers from life-saving surgery, a mother faces the impossible truth of her origins, and a man discovers the daughter he thought he lost forever. One question rises above all others. Can love truly find its way back, even after 28 years of being lost? This is not just a story about DNA or second chances. It's about healing, legacy, and the quiet moments that redefine everything you thought you knew. Stay with us, because what happens next will rewrite everything. He's been dealing with his heart condition his whole life, but he never complains. Even when he's scared, he tries to make me feel better about it. Grayson swallowed hard. He sounds like his grandmother, he murmured. Mila was like that, always thinking of others, even when she was hurting. Elena hesitated, then reached into her bag once more. I brought these, too. She pulled out a small stack of photographs, edges worn with time. I thought you might want to see them. Grayson accepted them with trembling hands. The first photo hit him like a tidal wave. Mila, lying in a hospital bed, cradling a newborn, a bandage on her temple, her face pale, but unmistakably, undeniably his wife. His breath caught. She looked so beautiful, he whispered. Elena nodded, her voice softer now. She was. She paused, her fingers grazing the edge of another photo. In my earliest memories, she was the one who sang me to sleep. Zara worked long hours at the hospital, but Aunt Mila, Mama, was always there, a small, wistful smile. Every night. Fragments of the past. Grayson flipped through the photos slowly, his fingers tracing the edges as if he could reach into the past and reclaim the years he had lost. Mila pushing toddler Elena on a swing. Mila guiding Elena's small hands as she blew out birthday candles. Mila running alongside a wobbly bike, her laughter frozen in time. A life that should have been his to witness. Were there ever any signs that she remembered? He asked, his voice quieter now. Elena considered this, tilting her head as distant memories surfaced. She had headaches sometimes, and nightmares. She'd wake up crying but couldn't remember why. She hesitated, then added, When I was about 12, we were looking at a magazine and there was an article about your company. Your photo was there. She stared at it for the longest time. Then, suddenly got a terrible headache and had to lie down. Grayson's chest tightened. Mila had seen his face, felt the pull of something she couldn't explain. He exhaled slowly. Zara's diary mentioned that just before the accident, Mila was having memories return. She was on her way to Boston. Elena nodded. She was excited, said she had a feeling she might find answers there. Her voice dropped. I was angry she was leaving. Typical teenage stuff. Our last conversation was an argument. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I never got to say goodbye properly. Grayson hesitated, then reached out, his hand covering hers in a quiet gesture of understanding. I'm so sorry, Elena. She stared at their hands for a long moment, then slowly pulled something from her pocket, a small, worn medallion, half of a St. Jude pendant. Zara gave me this after Mila died, she murmured. Said it had belonged to my mother, told me to keep it close, that someday it would lead me to my roots. A short, humorless laugh escaped her lips. I thought she was being metaphorical. Grayson reached into his own pocket, his fingers closing around something cold and familiar. He pulled out the other half, 2 broken pieces of the same whole, finding their way back. May I? Grayson asked softly. Elena nodded, watching as he carefully took her half of the medallion. With deliberate precision, he aligned the 2 broken pieces, holding them together until the inscription became whole again. True love always finds its way back. Grayson exhaled, his fingers tightening around the reunited pendant. Mila and I had these made before we were married, he murmured. We split them the day before she left to visit her parents, that trip that ended in the accident. It was supposed to be something silly and romantic, but it meant everything to us. Elena studied the words etched into the metal. It's not silly, she said quietly. It found its way back, just like the inscription said. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something steady and unspoken. In that moment, they were no longer just two strangers bound by circumstance. They were two people connected by love for the same woman. By concern for the same child, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Miss Lewis?" Elena turned quickly. "Dr. Vivian asked me to update you. Robert's doing well. The procedure is going as expected, but it will be a few more hours before they're finished." Elena's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." As the nurse walked away, Grayson hesitated before speaking. "Elena, I know this is all happening very fast," she finished for him. He nodded. "And your focus right now is rightfully on Robert. But if you're willing, I'd like to do a DNA test to confirm what we both already suspect." Elena met his gaze, considering. After everything she had read in Zara's diary, after all the emotions unraveling in front of them, there was no question in her mind. "Yes," she said. "I think we both need to know for certain," Grayson offered. "I can arrange for a private lab to run the test tomorrow. We could have results in 24 hours. Elena blinked. "That fast?" "Reuniting the pieces." "Money tends to expedite things," Grayson said with a slight smile. "And I've waited 28 years already. I'd rather not wait any longer than necessary." Elena studied him, really studied him. The lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the strong jawline subtly mirrored in her own features. "I named my son after you," she said suddenly. "Robert Grayson. I didn't know why at the time. I told myself I just liked the name. But maybe, somewhere deep down, I knew." Grayson swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. Before he could respond, Elena reached into her bag once more, pulling out a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "To be opened when the medallion halves are reunited." "I haven't opened it yet," she admitted, her fingers tightening around the envelope. "I was waiting for you." Grayson nodded, understanding the significance. Together they broke the seal, unfolding the pages inside. Zara's handwriting, familiar yet trembling with age, spilled across the paper in careful lines. As they read, the full truth emerged. More than the diary had revealed, Zara recounted the chaos after the accident, the confusion in the hospital, the misfiled records. By the time the heir was discovered, Grayson had already been told his wife and unborn child had died. And when Mila finally woke, with no memory of her past, Zara had made a choice that would alter all their lives. "I convinced myself I was protecting both of you," she had written. "Mila, from the trauma of being forced into a life she couldn't remember, and Grayson from the pain of living with a wife who didn't know him. I told myself it was temporary, that when Mila's memory returned we would find you, Grayson. But days became months, then years. The longer I waited, the harder it became to imagine revealing the truth." Elena blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. Grayson's grip on the letter tightened. The final paragraph undid them both. "Elena, I know now that I was wrong. Every person deserves to know where they came from, who they are. Grayson deserved to know his child. When you find each other, and I believe with all my heart that someday you will, I hope you can forgive an old woman who made a terrible mistake for what she thought were the right reason. The medallion halves have found each other again, just as the inscription promised. Now it's time for the family to be whole as well." Elena inhaled shakily. Grayson swiped at his eyes, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For 28 years, their lives had run parallel, never intersecting. But here, in this moment, the past and present converged. They weren't just uncovering a lost history, they were rewriting their future. Grayson folded the letter with care, his fingers lingering on the edges before he placed it gently back in Elena's hands. "I think," he said quietly, "that Zara did what she thought was best in an impossible situation. And while I wish things had been different, I'm grateful that you had her and Mila in your life." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the doors to the waiting room swung open. Dr. Vivian stepped in, still dressed in surgical scrubs. "Lewis, Mr. Peterson, I have news about Robert." Elena shot to her feet, her heart hammering. "How is he?" The doctor's face remained composed, giving nothing away. "Robert's doing well," he assured them. "The surgery is progressing as expected, but we've encountered a slight complication." Grayson immediately straightened beside Elena. "What kind of complication?" Dr. Vivian held up a hand, anticipating their alarm. "The defect is more complex than we initially thought. However," he added quickly, catching the way Elena's face drained of color. "The medical history you provided, Mr. Peterson, has been invaluable. The details about similar cases in your family helped us adapt our approach in real time." Elena exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. "So he's going to be okay?" The doctor nodded. "We're optimistic. The surgery will take longer than anticipated, but Robert is stable. His vitals are strong." Grayson placed a steadying hand on Elena's shoulder. "Thank you, Doctor." Dr. Vivian gave a reassuring nod. "I'll update you again when we're further along." Then he disappeared through the double doors. Elena sank back into her chair, the temporary relief quickly overshadowed by lingering guilt. "I should have brought him in sooner," she murmured, staring at the floor. "I waited too long to save enough money." Grayson shook his head, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't do that. You did everything you could. Robert is getting the care he needs now, and that's what matters." Elena nodded faintly, but the weight of her emotions still clung to her. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Two lives intertwined by fate. Two people waiting for the moment that would define their future. "Would you like some coffee?" Grayson offered after a while. "I could use some, and it might be a long night." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "That would be great, thank you." When Grayson returned with 2 steaming cups, Elena had composed herself. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic as though drawing strength from it. "While you were gone, I called the lab you mentioned," she said. "They can see us tomorrow morning at 9. I hope that works for you." Grayson nodded. "Of course. I've cleared my schedule indefinitely." He hesitated, then met her gaze. "No matter what the test shows, Elena, I want you to know that I'll help with Robert's medical expenses. All of them. Not just this surgery." Elena's first instinct was to refuse, but then she thought of Robert, of the lifetime of medical care he might need. Her pride wasn't worth jeopardizing her son's future. She took a breath, then met Grayson's steady gaze. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." 2014. Mila Fletcher sat at her small desk staring at the newspaper clipping in her trembling hands. The photo showed a distinguished-looking man in his 40s. Grayson Peterson, CEO of Peterson Development Group, cutting a ribbon at some corporate event in Boston. Something about his face sent a jolt through her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd seen it before, not just in newspapers. Somewhere else, somewhere that mattered. A memory flickered at the edges of her mind, just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Then, the headache started. A dull ache at her temples, growing sharper, until it felt as though her skull might crack open. She pressed her fingers against her forehead as flashes of images seared through her mind. A coastal highway, slick with rain. A half medallion resting against her collarbone. A man's face, smiling at her. The same face from the newspaper, only younger, more carefree. Her breath hitched. "Grayson," she whispered, the name strange yet familiar on her tongue, as if she had spoken it 1,000 times before. The pain intensified, making her vision blur. With shaking hands, she fumbled for her migraine medication, swallowing it dry. As the throbbing slowly subsided, she clenched the newspaper clipping tighter. She had to go to Boston. She didn't know why, only that she had to. 15 years of 15 years of feeling like a stranger in her own life. She couldn't live in the shadows of the unknown any longer. It was time for answers. Boston, she would go to Boston and find the man whose face haunted her dreams. Somehow she knew, deep in her bones, that he was the key to everything she had lost. The technician at the private lab was efficient and discreet, taking cheek swabs from both Grayson and Elena without unnecessary conversation. The sterile environment, bright lights, gleaming surfaces, the hum of precision instruments felt strangely fitting for such a life-altering moment. Science would soon confirm what their hearts already believed. "We'll have the results by tomorrow morning," the technician informed them. "Dr. Sanders will call you personally with the findings." Outside, the Portland morning was crisp and clear, the fresh air a welcome contrast to the weight of uncertainty pressing on them. Grayson glanced at Elena as they walked to the parking lot. "Back to the hospital?" She nodded. "Robert should be waking up soon. The doctors are keeping him sedated to help with recovery, but they said the surgery went well." "I'd like to come with you," Grayson said carefully, "even if we don't have the test results yet." Elena hesitated. A part of her wanted to shield Robert from the confusion of meeting a stranger who might or might not be his grandfather, but another part recognized Grayson's sincerity. If he truly was family, he had a right to be there. Okay, she decided, but let me explain things to him first, when he's awake and feeling up to it. Of course, Grayson agreed readily. I'll stay in the background. He won't even have to know who I am yet. During the drive back to the hospital, Elena found herself stealing glances at Grayson when he wasn't looking. The strong lines of his jaw, the familiar set of his eyes. In his profile, she could almost see reflections of herself. And maybe, just maybe, of Robert too. What was she like? Elena asked suddenly. Mila, I mean, before the accident. Grayson's expression softened at once. She was extraordinary, vibrant, passionate about art and literature. She could talk about a painting for hours, making you see it in ways you never would have on your own. A wistful smile crossed his face as he recalled a distant memory. She laughed easily and cried at sappy commercials. She was terrible at cooking but kept trying anyway. She hated being late for anything and always set our clocks. 11 minutes fast, Elena finished. She never cooked when I was growing up. Zara did all the cooking. She paused, absorbing this newfound glimpse of the woman she had only known as her aunt. But she was always early for everything. She used to say, being on time means you're already late. Grayson let out a soft laugh. That was her favorite saying. They continued exchanging stories. Elena sharing memories of growing up with Aunt Mila, and Grayson offering glimpses of the woman she had been before the accident. Piece by piece, a portrait of Mila emerged, transcending the years that had separated them. She had changed, yet at her core, she had remained the same. Robert was still asleep when they arrived at his hospital room. The sight of him in the bed, small and pale, wires and tubes connecting him to machines, made Grayson's throat tighten. It was his grandson, a child of his bloodline, the continuation of a family he had thought was lost in that ravine 28 years ago. Elena moved instinctively to Robert's side, brushing his hair back from his forehead with gentle fingers, her touch full of practiced tenderness. Grayson remained by the door, reluctant to intrude on the quiet moment between mother and son. A soft knock interrupted the silence as Dr. Vivian stepped into the room, Robert's chart in hand. The surgery was a complete success, Dr. Vivian reported. We were able to fully repair the defect. With proper care and monitoring, Robert should be able to live a normal, healthy life. Elena exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. When will he wake up? We'll start bringing him out of sedation this afternoon. He'll be groggy at first, but by evening, he should be more alert. And recovery time? Grayson asked from his position near the door. Vivian glanced between them, clearly noting their dynamic but remaining professional. He'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week, then take it easy at home for another few weeks. Children are remarkably resilient, though. I expect he'll be back to full activity within 2 months. Once the doctor left, Elena settled into the chair beside Robert's bed while Grayson took up a quieter post by the window. They sat in companionable silence, exchanging occasional murmured words about Robert's condition and the next steps in his recovery. Grayson noticed the way Elena's eyes fluttered shut, only to snap open again as she fought exhaustion. You should get some rest, he said gently. I can stay and watch him. She hesitated, maternal instinct warring with sheer fatigue. I don't want him to wake up alone. I'll wake you the moment anything changes, Grayson promised. You won't be any good to him if you collapse from exhaustion. After a beat, Elena gave a small nod. She reclined the chair as far as it would go and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had steadied into sleep. Grayson remained awake, watching over both of them. This daughter and grandson he had only just discovered. The intensity of the protectiveness he felt surprised him. Despite nearly 3 decades of separation, blood still carried its own undeniable bond. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Careful not to wake Elena, he stepped quietly into the hallway before answering. Mr. Peterson, this is Dr. Sanders from Pacific Genetics. Grayson's pulse quickened. Yes, doctor? I know we said tomorrow, but our lab was able to process your samples immediately due to a cancellation, Dr. Sanders said. I have your results. Grayson's grip on the phone tightened. Go ahead. The DNA comparison shows a 99.9% probability that you are the biological father of Elena Lewis. Congratulations, Mr. Peterson. Though he had anticipated this outcome, The confirmation struck him with an unexpected force. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding escaped in a slow exhale. It was real. Elena was his daughter. Reborn was his grandson. The family he had lost, thought gone forever, was here. Grayson muttered his thanks, ended the call, and leaned against the wall, grounding himself in the magnitude of the moment. Inside the room, the stillness was broken by a slight stir. Robert shifted, his eyelids fluttering as he began to wake. Grayson moved immediately to Elena's side, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Elena," he murmured, "I think he's waking up." She blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. "And the lab called early," Grayson added, his voice thick with emotion. "The test results are in." Elena sat up straight, instantly alert. And Grayson met her gaze, his throat tightening. "It's confirmed. You're my daughter, Elena. You're really my daughter." Before she could respond, a small, sleepy voice from the bed interrupted them. "Mom, who's that man?" They turned to find Robert watching them with groggy curiosity. Elena's breath caught, but she quickly refocused, moving to Robert's side, her conversation with Grayson momentarily set aside. "Hey, buddy." She brushed his hair back gently. "How are you feeling?" Robert's small face scrunched in concentration as he took stock of himself, blinking drowsily against the lingering effects of anesthesia. "Kind of weird," Robert mumbled, his voice still thick with drowsiness. "My chest hurts." His gaze drifted past Elena to the man standing at the foot of the bed, watching with quiet hesitation. "Who's that?" Elena and Grayson exchanged a glance. This wasn't how either had planned the introduction, but Robert's directness left no room for delay. Elena chose her words carefully. "This is Mr. Peterson. He's a friend who's been helping us with your surgery." Grayson gave a small wave. "Hello, Robert. I'm really glad to see you awake." Robert studied him with the unfiltered curiosity only a 7-year-old could manage. "Did you give us the money for my operation?" Grayson hesitated, glancing at Elena for guidance. She nodded slightly. "Permission given." "Yes, I did," Grayson admitted. "I wanted to help." Robert considered this for a moment before asking, "Are you rich?" Elena made a strangled noise between a laugh and a groan. "Robert, that's not polite." Grayson chuckled. "It's okay." He crouched slightly to meet Robert's gaze. "Yes, I am fortunate enough to have money to help people when they need it." Robert nodded sagely, as though assessing an important fact. "That's good. Mom works really hard, but hospitals cost a lot." Grayson's chest tightened at the boy's simple, matter-of-fact statement. He wanted to say something, anything, to ease the burden Elena had carried alone for so long. But before he could find the words, Robert's attention shifted. "Hey, where's Robo-Rex?" Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the well-loved stuffed dinosaur. Robert took it eagerly, clutching it with his free arm, the one without the IV. The small gesture made Grayson's heart constrict. This child, his grandson, was finding comfort in a toy, just as Elena had at that age. He recalled a photo Zara had once shown him of young Elena, inseparable from a stuffed rabbit. Some things, it seemed, ran deeper than blood. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, clipboard in hand. "Well, look who's awake. How's my favorite patient feeling today?" The nurse's cheerful voice filled the hospital room as she stepped inside, her smile warm and reassuring. Robert blinked up at her, still drowsy, his small fingers tightening around the stuffed dinosaur in his arms. "Sleepy," he admitted, his voice slightly hoarse from the lingering effects of the anesthesia. "That's to be expected," the nurse said kindly as she adjusted his IV and checked the monitors. "You're doing great, champ. Keep resting and you'll be up in no time." As she worked, Grayson instinctively stepped back, giving them space. He glanced at Elena, who met his gaze and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." For the financial support? For handling Robert's questions carefully? He wasn't sure, but he inclined his head in quiet acknowledgement. When the nurse left, Robert was already fighting to keep his eyes open. "The medication makes him groggy," Elena murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from her son's forehead. "Dr. Vivian said he'll be in and out for the next day or so." Grayson exhaled softly. "I should probably give you both some space," he said, reluctant but respectful. "I'll be in the waiting room if you need anything." He had just turned to go when Robert's small voice called after him. "Mr. Peterson?" Grayson turned back instantly. "Yeah, buddy?" The boy shifted slightly in bed, blinking at him with the hazy determination of a child trying to stay awake. "Will you come back later? I want to show you my dinosaur collection. Mom brought my book with all the pictures." The request caught Grayson off guard, and when he spoke, his voice had an unfamiliar roughness to it. "I'd like that very much, Robert." Robert seemed satisfied with that answer, already sinking back into the comfort of his pillows. In the waiting room, Grayson paced restlessly. The weight of everything settled on him in a way it hadn't before. Seeing Robert awake, hearing him ask to see him again, it made their bond tangible, undeniable. He had a grandson, a flesh and blood continuation of the family he had thought lost forever. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw his assistant's name flashing on the screen. "Mr. Peterson," she greeted briskly. "I wanted to follow up on the Portland property acquisition. The board needs your final decision. The option expires tomorrow." For a moment, Grayson had no idea what she was talking about. The deal, the one that had originally brought him to this city, felt like a distant memory. He glanced toward the hallway leading back to Robert's room. "Tell them I'm extending my stay in Portland indefinitely," he said, the decision coming easily. "The acquisition is on hold for now." A brief silence, then confusion laced his assistant's voice. "On hold? But sir, you've been working on this deal for months." Grayson looked down at his phone, then out the waiting room window, where the sun was beginning to rise over the city that had unexpectedly given him back his family. "Some things," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "are more important than business." "Things change, Margaret. I'll explain everything when I'm back in the office." Grayson ended the call and exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the sterile white wall in front of him. His mind, however, was anything but blank. It was a storm of shifting priorities and unexpected revelations. For years, Boston had been home. Then, as his company expanded, Portland had become his base of operations. And now, as if by some grand design, Elena and Robert were here too. The realization sent a strange shiver through him. He had never been one to believe in destiny, but this felt like more than coincidence. It was as if the universe had woven an invisible thread, pulling them all toward this moment. His fingers brushed against the chain around his neck, where a small, time-worn medallion rested beneath his shirt. The words engraved upon it whispered through his thoughts. "True love always finds its way back." He had carried those words with him for nearly 3 decades, clinging to them in his darkest moments, even when they had seemed like nothing more than a cruel reminder of what he had lost. But now, for the first time in years, they felt like a promise fulfilled. By evening, Robert was awake, his small face still pale, but his eyes more alert. Though exhaustion clung to him, his spirit remained undimmed. Elena had stepped out to grab something to eat, leaving Grayson alone with the boy. Grayson glanced at the well-loved stuffed dinosaur in Robert's arms. "So, you like dinosaurs?" Robert perked up instantly, gripping Roborex as if the toy might help him better explain his passion. "I love dinosaurs, they're awesome." A spark of enthusiasm lit up his tired features as he declared, "I'm going to be a paleontologist when I grow up." Then, as if sensing Grayson might need further clarification, he added seriously, "That's a scientist who digs up dinosaur bones." Grayson smiled. "That sounds like an incredible job." Robert's eyes widened. "You think so?" "Absolutely. I've always found dinosaurs fascinating myself." It was apparently the perfect answer. Robert's face lit up, and he launched into an impassioned explanation about the Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic periods, rattling off the names of dinosaurs with impressive accuracy. Grayson listened, genuinely engaged, nodding in all the right places, asking just enough thoughtful questions to keep Robert going. Halfway through an in-depth analysis of Tyrannosaurus rex versus Spinosaurus, Robert paused and wrinkled his nose. "Mom says I talk too much about dinosaurs sometimes." Grayson leaned in slightly, his voice warm. "I don't think there's such a thing as talking too much about something you love." Robert considered this, then tilted his head. "Did you love dinosaurs when you were a kid too?" Grayson chuckled. "I did, but I had other passions too, like business and building things." Robert absorbed this, then offered, "Mom says everyone has something they're really good at. Something they love doing so much they never get bored." "She's right," Grayson agreed. "Your grandmother felt that way about art." The words left his lips before he could stop them. Robert blinked, his young brow furrowing. "My grandmother?" He looked confused. "You knew her?" Grayson stiffened. The slip was small but dangerous. "I meant your mom's aunt," he corrected smoothly. "I understand she loved art very much." Robert seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Oh, Aunt Mila! Mom has some of her paintings at home. They're really pretty." Grayson nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. On the past he had barely begun to reclaim, and the fragile steps toward the future he suddenly longed to protect. Robert yawned widely, his small face scrunching as his eyelids fluttered. He mumbled sleepily. "You should rest," Grayson suggested gently, his voice low and soothing. "We can talk more about dinosaurs tomorrow." Robert nodded, his grip loosening slightly around Robo-Rex. "Will you stay until Mom comes back?" he murmured. "I don't like being alone in hospitals." Grayson felt something in his chest tighten, an unfamiliar yet unmistakable protectiveness. "Of course," he promised. "I'll be right here." As Robert drifted off, his breathing evening out, Grayson studied his face in the dim hospital light. Even at this young age, the boy bore traces of the Peterson lineage, the shape of his nose, the subtle set of his jaw. It was undeniable. The weight of lost years pressed against him, but for the first time, there was something else too. Hope. The soft sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Elena returned, carrying 2 sandwiches and a pair of coffee cups. She held one out to him. "I figured you might be hungry." Grayson took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." She set her things down, glancing at Robert. "He's asleep." "Just now. We had quite the conversation about dinosaurs." Elena exhaled a small laugh, sitting beside him. "Let me guess, he gave you the full lecture?" "He did," Grayson confirmed, his lips twitching in amusement. "It was fascinating. He's incredibly bright." Elena's expression softened with maternal pride as she unwrapped her sandwich. They ate in a comfortable silence, both watching Robert's peaceful face, the quiet hum of hospital monitors filling the space between them. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "The DNA test," she said, her voice measured. "You said it confirmed?" Grayson turned to her, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "You're my daughter, Elena." She let out a slow breath, processing the words as if hearing them aloud made them more real. "It's strange," she admitted. "Part of me already knew. The medallion, the timing, the details, it all lined up. But hearing it confirmed scientifically, it makes it real in a way I wasn't expecting." Grayson nodded. "I know exactly what you mean. Even with all the signs, part of me still kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? But now, there's no question." Elena hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. What happens now? It was a deceptively simple question, yet it held layers upon layers of uncertainty. What their relationship would look like moving forward, what role Grayson would play in Robert's life, what this new truth would mean for all of them. Grayson considered his response carefully. "That's entirely up to you," he said finally. "I don't want to impose or disrupt the life you've built. You and Robert have done fine without me, but if you're open to it, I'd like to be a part of your lives." Elena studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words against the man sitting beside her. "When I was a kid," she said at last, "I used to imagine what my father was like. Zara and Mila told me he had died before I was born, so I made up stories. Stories where he was kind and brave, where he would have loved me if he'd had the chance." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "I think the real story is better." Grayson felt his throat tighten. "Eleanor," he murmured. "If I had known about you," he said, his voice rough with conviction, "nothing would have kept me from being in your life." "I believe that," she said simply. "And that's why I think Robert should know. Not right away. He needs time to recover, and this is a lot for a 7-year-old to process, but soon." Grayson nodded, deeply moved by her trust. "Whenever you think the time is right, I'll be ready." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Vivienne entered, followed by another doctor, an elegant woman with a warm yet professional demeanor. Lewis, Mr. Peterson," Dr. Vivienne said. "This is Dr. Chen, our pediatric cardiologist. She'll be overseeing Robert's recovery." Dr. Chen offered a reassuring smile. "Robert's postoperative results are excellent. The repair was a complete success, and his heart function is already showing significant improvement." Elena exhaled in relief. Vivienne turned to Grayson. "The data from your father's medical history was invaluable. It helped us tailor our approach specifically to Robert's condition." Dr. Chen nodded. "This particular variant of the defect runs in families, and having that genetic information made all the difference." Grayson glanced at Robert, still sleeping peacefully, then back at the two doctors. For the first time in his life, his past had given him something more than regret. It had given him a future. Grayson and Elena exchanged a knowing look, both recognizing the quiet irony of it all. The connection that had been buried for decades, the very truth they had unknowingly lived without, had ultimately played a pivotal role in saving Robert's life. "When can he come home?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the lingering tension in her shoulders. Dr. Chen offered a reassuring smile. "If he continues progressing at this rate, I'd say in about 5 days. Then he'll need a few weeks of rest at home before resuming normal activities. But, given how strong he is, I expect a smooth recovery." Elena exhaled slowly, some of the weight on her chest easing. 5 days. It still felt like an eternity, but it was an answer, one she could hold on to after the doctors left. She turned to Grayson with a faint, almost teasing smile. "I should warn you," she said, "my apartment is tiny. There's barely room for Robert's dinosaur collection, let alone visitors." Grayson understood the unspoken question beneath her words. "I have a house on the west side," he offered carefully. "Plenty of space for both of you while Robert recovers, but only if you're comfortable with that." He hesitated before adding, "Or I could help you find a larger apartment if that would be better for you." Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. For a man who seemed so used to control, he was treading lightly, giving her the space to decide. It was strange, comforting even, to have someone offering help without expectation. "Let's just take it one day at a time," she said at last. "For now, let's focus on Robert getting better." Grayson nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. They had time now, something that had been stolen from them for 28 years. He could afford to be patient. Beside them, Robert shifted in his sleep, his small hand stretching outward in search of something familiar. Without hesitation, Elena reached for him, years of maternal instinct guiding her every move. But then, after a pause, she extended her other hand toward Grayson, bridging the space between them. For a moment, he simply looked at her, surprised, moved. Then, without hesitation, he took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "A link across 3 generations. One day at a time," Grayson echoed softly. 3 months later. Spring had settled fully over Portland, painting the city in shades of renewal. Slush greenery stretching toward the warming sun, flower beds bursting into color, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh beginnings. It felt fitting, in a way, that this season of rebirth mirrored the quiet transformation of the Peterson family. Elena stood behind the counter of what had once been Golden Memories Café, watching as Grayson and Robert secured a new sign above the entrance. The wooden placard swayed slightly in the breeze, the freshly painted lettering catching the sunlight. "The Cherished Moments." The words were scripted in elegant, flowing print, with the faint outline of a medallion etched into the background. A silent tribute to the object that had unknowingly linked them all these years. "What do you think?" Grayson called through the open door, glancing down to ensure Robert wasn't underfoot as he tightened the last screw. "It's perfect," Elena answered, and this time, the words carried no hesitation, just truth. The transformation of the cafe had been Grayson's idea, first suggested a month after Robert's recovery. Instead of following through with his original redevelopment plans, he had made a different proposal, one that had taken Elena completely by surprise. "Golden Memories was there for you when you needed it," he had said. "But now we can turn it into something that represents our story, something new, built together. The cherished moments finally coming together." Elena had hesitated. She had built her life on independence, on never relying too much on anyone, especially when it came to something as personal as her livelihood. Accepting such a significant gesture from Grayson had felt unnatural at first. But the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. She knew the cafe business inside and out, and running it would give her the flexible schedule she needed for Robert's continued checkups. More than that, though, it gave them something to create together. Not just memories, but something real, something lasting. "Grandpa says we can open tomorrow if the health inspector gives the okay." Robert's voice, bright with excitement, rang through the cafe as he bounded inside, his energy fully restored after the surgery. Elena still marveled at how easily he had adapted to the presence of a grandfather in his life. Children, she had learned, were far more resilient than adults. When they had carefully explained the situation to him, framing it not as a painful secret but as a joyful discovery, he had accepted it with the simplicity only a child could. "Does this mean I get presents on both my birthday and Christmas?" he had asked with wide-eyed curiosity. Grayson, of course, had taken that as a personal challenge and had been spoiling him ever since. "The inspector's coming at 3, Elena confirmed, "but we followed every regulation to the letter, so we should be fine." The renovation had been thorough but thoughtful. The cafe still held the warmth and charm that longtime customers loved, but they had made careful updates, expanding the seating area, upgrading the kitchen, and adding a small art gallery showcasing local artists. It was a quiet tribute to Mila, whose passion for art had been a guiding light in Elena's childhood. "Amanda Lewis?" Carol, one of the original waitresses who had chosen to stay on through the transition, appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "The display case for the medallion just arrived." Elena nodded. "Bring it out. We'll set it up now." Tomorrow the doors would open for the first time under its new name, but today they would place the medallion, the symbol of lost time, found family, and the undeniable power of fate, right where it belonged. The custom-made glass display case was the final piece, the last detail that would make the cherished moments feel complete. It was a small but elegant dome, designed to showcase the now reunited St. Jude medallion. Grayson had taken both halves to a skilled jeweler who had carefully rejoined them, preserving the natural break line as a testament to its history, yet securing them together permanently. The medallion would be displayed near the entrance, accompanied by a small plaque explaining its connection to the cafe's name. Not the full story, of course, that remained private, but the message was clear. Sometimes broken things could be made whole again. "Where should we put it?" Grayson asked, carrying the display case to the counter. "By the register," Elena suggested. "That way everyone will see it when they pay." As they positioned the case carefully, the bell over the door chimed. Elena looked up to see Dr. Vivian stepping inside, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "I heard you were opening soon," he said, his smile warm as he spotted Robert. "Thought I'd stop by to check on my favorite patient." "Dr. Vivian," Robert dashed over, beaming. "Want to see our new cafe? Grandpa got me my own special chair in the corner so I can do my homework after school." "I'd love to see it," the doctor replied, allowing himself to be led toward Robert's designated spot. Elena watched them with a contented smile. Over the past few months, Dr. Vivian had become more than just Robert's surgeon. He had become a friend. He stopped by occasionally, not just to check on Robert's recovery, but to share a cup of coffee and a conversation. "He looks great," Grayson observed, coming to stand beside her. "You'd never know he had surgery." "Thanks to you," Elena said softly. "If you hadn't walked into the cafe that day..." Grayson shook his head. "I think we would have found each other eventually. The medallion halves were meant to be rejoined, just like our family." Elena rolled her eyes at his sentimentality, but she couldn't stop the smile tugging at her lips. Over the months, she had come to understand something about Grayson. Beneath his pragmatic, businesslike exterior was a deeply romantic heart. Mila had been the same way. "I found more of her paintings," Grayson mentioned, nodding toward the cafe's art wall, where several of Mila's works now hung. "In storage at my old Boston house. I'll bring them next time I go back." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of shared history between them. Piece by piece, they had been uncovering Mila's life after the accident. Her artistic evolution, the struggles she faced with memory loss, and ultimately her quiet journey toward reclaiming fragments of her past. It was a way of honoring her, of ensuring that her story wasn't lost. "I have something for you," Grayson said after a moment, reaching into his pocket. "I was waiting for the right time." He placed a small velvet box in her hands. Elena hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, its only charm a tiny replica of the St. Jude medallion. A perfect, whole circle. "I had it made for you," Grayson explained, "so you'll always have the full medallion with you, even with the original here in the display." Elena's fingers traced the tiny charm, her throat tightening. These unexpected moments of thoughtfulness still caught her off guard. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Thank you." As Grayson helped fasten the bracelet around her wrist, Robert came bounding back into the room, Dr. Vivian following behind him. "Mom, Dr. Vivian brought us a newspaper article about the cafe. We're famous." Elena took the paper from him, scanning the small feature in the local business section. Golden Memories Cafe Reborn as the Cherished Moments, a family's fresh start. "It's a nice write-up," Dr. Vivian commented. though they only scratch the surface of your remarkable story. Some stories are better kept within the family, Grayson replied, his gaze steady. Elena nodded, understanding. The article spoke of the cafe's transformation, the community support, and the spirit of renewal, but the deeper history, the years of separation, the lost time, the journey back to each other, remained theirs alone. As they continued the final preparations for the grand opening, Elena found herself pausing now and then to take it all in. Her son, healthy and laughing, her father present at last, their shared project coming to life around them. The cafe wasn't just a business, it was proof of how far they had come, a tangible symbol of the second chance they had been given. Later that evening, after Robert had gone to bed upstairs, his new room in the renovated apartment above the cafe, Elena and Grayson sat at one of the tables, going over last-minute details. The quiet hum of the city filtered through the windows, a stark contrast to the bustling day ahead of them. "Are you nervous?" Grayson asked Elena, considering the question. "Not about the cafe," she admitted. "We're ready, and I know this business, but sometimes I worry about us. What if this doesn't work? What if we're trying to force something just because of biology, instead of because we truly fit?" Grayson was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "I think what makes a family isn't just blood, Elena, it's choice." He met her eyes, his voice steady. "Zara and Mila chose to be your family. Now we're all choosing this. You, me, and Robert. And that choice matters more than DNA." Elena exhaled slowly, letting his words settle. Maybe it wasn't about making up for the past or fitting into a perfect mold. Maybe it was simply about showing up, day after day, moment after moment, until love became something undeniable. She glanced down at the tiny medallion charm on her wrist, running her thumb over its surface. "Whole again." Elena nodded, finding comfort in his perspective. "I wish they could see this," she said softly. "Zara and Mila, I think they'd be happy for us, despite everything." "I think so too," Grayson agreed. "Zara made a difficult choice all those years ago. Right or wrong, she did it out of love, and in the end, love found a way to bring us back together." Elena's fingers brushed the delicate bracelet on her wrist, the tiny medallion charm catching the light. "True love always finds its way back." She murmured, the words feeling truer than ever. The next morning, as the first customers trickled into the Cherished Moments Café, Elena stood behind the counter, watching the scene unfold. Grayson chatted animatedly with patrons, slipping into the role of host with surprising ease, while Robert proudly showed off his designated homework corner to anyone who would listen. The reunited medallion gleamed in its display case, the soft morning light making the inscription almost seem to glow. "True love always finds its way back." It had, for the first time in her life, Elena felt whole. Not because she had found her biological father, but because she had finally connected all the pieces of her past. Zara and Mila would always be part of her, but now that story had expanded, stretching forward to include Grayson and the future they would build together. She exhaled slowly, taking in the warmth of the cafe, the murmur of conversation, the comforting scent of coffee and fresh pastries. She was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 year later. Exactly 1 year after Elena and Grayson had first met in Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, they returned, this time together. The weather was considerably better than it had been that first day. Instead of the gray drizzle of that fateful afternoon, the sky was a brilliant blue, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Robert walked between them, carefully holding a bouquet of calla lilies in each hand. "Are we almost there?" he asked, his 7-year-old patience wearing thin despite the solemnity of the occasion. "Just a little further," Elena assured him, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. As they reached the twin headstones, a quiet hush fell over them. Mila Peterson, Zara Lewis, 2 women whose choices had shaped their lives in irrevocable ways. 2 women they had loved deeply, in different ways, across different times. Grayson crouched down, running his fingers lightly over the smooth marble of Mila's name. "She would have loved the cafe," he said quietly, "and she would have adored Robert." Robert grinned, setting down the bouquet at Mila's grave before moving to Zara's. He hesitated for a moment, then looked up at his mother. "Do you think Nana Zara would have liked me?" Elena swallowed past the lump in her throat, brushing a hand over his curls. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm. She would have loved you more than anything in the world." Robert seemed satisfied with that, arranging the flowers neatly before stepping back. Elena turned to Grayson, her gaze soft. "You were right," she admitted. "Family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. And they chose us, just like we're choosing each other now." Grayson nodded, reaching for her hand, standing together, looking down at the women who had shaped their past. They silently promised to carry their love forward, not just in memories, but in the life they were building, in the family they had become, and in the love that had, against all odds, found its way back. Over the past year, they had made significant changes to the cemetery plots. Grayson had arranged for Mila's memorial to be moved next to Zara's, bringing together in death the two women who had been inseparable in life. New headstones had been commissioned, simple yet elegant, their inscriptions finally reflecting the truth of their roles in the family's story: Mila Nova Peterson, beloved wife, mother, and artist. True love always finds its way back. Zara Lillian Fletcher, devoted friend and guardian. Some angels walk among us. As they approached the graves, Elena noticed an elderly man standing nearby, watching them with quiet interest. His posture, respectful but expectant, suggested he wasn't there by coincidence. "Do you know him?" she murmured to Grayson. Grayson shook his head, his expression wary. Robert, oblivious to the stranger, carefully placed a bouquet on each grave before stepping back to stand between Elena and Grayson. The three of them observed a moment of silence, each lost in thought. Elena reflected on the whirlwind of the past year: Robert's recovery, the opening of the Cherished Moments Café, her slowly deepening relationship with Grayson. Though she had moved into a larger apartment in a building Grayson owned, she had insisted on paying rent, albeit at a reduced rate. Some boundaries, she felt, were important as they navigated their unusual family dynamic. "I think they would be proud of us," Grayson said quietly, his gaze on the headstones, "of how far we've come." Elena nodded, the ache of loss still there but softened by time and understanding. "I still miss them both," she admitted, "but it helps knowing the whole story now." As they turned to leave, the elderly man took a step forward. His movements were slow but deliberate, his presence commanding without being intrusive. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of advanced age. "You're Grayson Peterson, aren't you? And this must be Elena." Grayson instinctively shifted closer to Elena and Robert, his protective nature surfacing. "Yes, we are," he said carefully. "And you are?" The man offered a gentle smile. "Dr. Jameson Everett," he introduced himself. "I was the attending physician the night of Mila's accident." Elena inhaled sharply. The name was instantly familiar. The doctor Zara had mentioned in her diary, the one who had delivered her, and the one who had tried to save her twin brother. "Dr. Everett," Grayson acknowledged, extending his hand with quiet reverence. "Zara Fletcher mentioned you in her writings." The elderly doctor nodded, his grip surprisingly firm despite his age. "Zara was an extraordinary nurse, and even more extraordinary friend," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I've been retired for years now, but when I read about your cafe in the newspaper, the Cherished Moments, I knew it had to be you." Elena's curiosity sharpened. "How did you find us here?" Dr. Everett offered a knowing smile. "I visit this cemetery often to pay my respects to colleagues I once worked alongside. A few months ago, I noticed Zara's new headstone, placed beside Mila Peterson's. When I saw their names together, I suspected the past had finally come full circle. I had hoped that, in time, I might meet you here." He hesitated then, as if weighing the weight of his next words. "There's something I've been keeping for a very long time, something I believe belongs to you." With great care, he unfastened the worn leather satchel at his side and withdrew a small book, bound in faded blue fabric. The edges were frayed from time, yet the binding held firm, a quiet testament to its resilience, much like the woman who had once carried it. "This was among Mila's personal effects the night of the accident," Dr. Everett explained. In the chaos that followed, he exhaled, regret flickering in his eyes. It was never included with the official belongings given to the notification team. Elena's breath caught. Grayson, his expression unreadable, reached for the book as if it might vanish should he hesitate too long. Dr. Everett glanced down, a shadow of guilt crossing his features. By the time I realized the mistake, too many records had been misplaced, and Zara had already made her choice. Grayson turned the book over in his hands, his fingers brushing the cover like a relic from another life. Recognition dawned in his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. This was Mila's journal. She wrote in it every day. Dr. Everett inclined his head. Not just a journal, he corrected gently. It contains letters, Mr. Peterson. Letters to you, words she never had the chance to send. Elena felt her throat tighten, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. Letters from her mother to her father, words left unsaid, thoughts preserved on paper in the days before the accident that had torn them apart for nearly 30 years. Mom? Robert's small hand tugged at her sleeve, his young mind sensing the significance of what was unfolding, even if he didn't fully understand it. Who's that man? What's he giving Grandpa? Elena crouched beside him, her voice soft but steady. This is Dr. Everett. He was there the night I was born, and he's brought us something very special. Letters from my mother. Robert's eyes widened with wonder. From Grandma Mila, the one in the pictures? Elena nodded. Yes, sweetheart, from her. Dr. Everett bent slightly, his kind eyes meeting Robert's. You must be Robert, he said with a gentle smile. You have your grandmother's eyes, young man. Robert beamed at the words, his small chest puffing up with pride. Though he had never met Mila, he had come to know her through stories and cherished photographs, and this connection, however small, meant everything. Grayson, still holding the journal with careful reverence, finally spoke. His voice was level, but Elena could hear the restrained emotion beneath it. Why did you keep this for so long? Dr. Everett straightened, his gaze meeting Grayson's without wavering. At first, I kept it because I intended to return it as soon as the records were sorted out, he admitted. But when I learned that Zara had created a new identity for Mila and the baby, he exhaled heavily, shaking his head. I should have come forward then, I know that. But Zara truly believed she was doing the right thing, protecting a traumatized woman and an innocent child from a past that could have shattered them both. Elena's voice was quiet but firm. And later? Dr. Everett hesitated, the burden of decades weighing on his next words. Later, it felt too late to undo what had already been done, without causing even more pain. He looked down for a moment before continuing, regret shadowing his face. I'm not proud of my silence, but I respected Zara's decision, misguided as it may have been. He sighed. When Mila died in that second accident, I nearly contacted you, Mr. Peterson. But by then, I feared that unearthing the truth would only bring pain, with no purpose. Grayson remained still, absorbing the doctor's confession. After a long pause, he finally nodded, perhaps not in full forgiveness, but in understanding. And now? He asked. Everett's expression softened, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. Now, I've read about your family reuniting, despite everything that kept you apart. And I knew it was finally time to complete the circle. His voice carried the weight of a man who had spent a lifetime waiting for the right moment. Some stories deserve their proper ending, however belated. After exchanging contact information with Dr. Everett, Grayson insisted they meet again soon. He needed to hear more about the night Elena was born. But for now, there was something even more pressing. They found a quiet bench beneath a flowering cherry tree where the scent of blossoms drifted through the air. The moment felt delicate, almost suspended in time. Sensing the weight of the conversation ahead, Robert looked between them, his youthful energy momentarily subdued. Can I explore the garden while you talk? He asked. Elena ran a gentle hand through his hair. Stay where we can see you, okay? With a nod, Robert wandered off, inspecting the nearby flower beds, giving the adults the space they needed. Grayson exhaled slowly and, with hands that trembled ever so slightly, opened the journal. The faded pages held the echoes of a love lost to time. Words Mila had written, never meant to be left unread for so many years. The first page bore a date, November 3rd, 1998, the day before the accident. My dearest Grayson, as I prepare for tomorrow's drive to my parents' house, I already find myself missing you. These pregnancy hormones have made me terribly sentimental, but tonight I feel the need to write, to put into words something that has lingered in my heart since I woke up this morning. I had a dream about our child. I saw her, Grayson. Yes, her. I know you're convinced we're having a boy, but I can feel it in my soul. It's a girl. She had your smile in my eyes. She was beautiful and strong. In my dream, she was painting, just as I love to do, but with your precision, your steady hand and quiet focus. She was a perfect blend of the two of us, a harmony I could never have imagined until I saw her there. I know, it was just a dream, but it felt so vivid, so real, almost like a glimpse of the future. I can't wait to meet this little person we've created, to watch her grow. Will she have your business sense and my artistic temperament, your height and my freckles? However she turns out, I know one thing for certain. She will be extraordinary, because she will have your strength, your determination. She's kicking as I write this, as if to tell me she agrees. Just 4 more months, my love. 4 more months until we meet our child, until our family is complete. I carry the half medallion with me everywhere, pressing it to my heart whenever I miss you most. True love always finds its way back, it promises, and I believe it. Even when we're apart, I feel you with me, always. I'll call when I arrive at my parents' house tomorrow evening. Until then, know that you are loved beyond measure. Always, Mila. Forever yours, Mila. Grayson's voice broke as he read the final lines. His grip on the journal tightened, as if holding on to her words could somehow bring her back. Elena, unable to stop the steady stream of tears slipping down her cheeks, leaned into his shoulder. She knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Somehow, she knew I would carry pieces of both of you. For the next hour they sat in quiet reverence, turning the fragile pages and uncovering moments frozen in time. Mila's reflections on their early marriage, her hopes and dreams for the life they were building, the unshakable love she had for both Grayson and the child she never got to meet. And then the final entry. A rough, unfinished draft of a text message, running late, weather terrible, will call when I arrive safely, love you. Elena covered her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. It was such an ordinary message, one millions of people sent every day without a second thought. Yet for them, it was the last echo of Mila's voice before fate intervened. The sun had begun its descent, casting golden light over the cemetery. Shadows stretched long across the grass as they gently closed the journal, as if sealing away the final chapter of a story left unfinished for so long. Robert had returned to their bench, sitting cross-legged with Elena's phone in his hands, quietly playing a game. He hadn't asked questions or interrupted, just stayed close, sensing the gravity of the moment in his own way. Elena turned to Grayson, her voice soft but certain. "What do we do now?" Grayson glanced at the journal, then at the graves of the women who had shaped their lives, and finally at the 2 people who were his family. "We honor her," he said simply, "by being the family she always believed we would be, by building the life she dreamed of for us, and by keeping these letters safe so that Robert and his children someday will know the extraordinary history they come from." Elena nodded, running her fingers over the bracelet on her wrist, feeling the smooth metal of the tiny medallion charm. "True love found its way back," she murmured, "not just yours and Mila's, but all of us, past, present, and future." As they rose and walked back through the cemetery, Robert skipped a few steps ahead, his usual light-hearted energy returning. Grayson slipped an arm around Elena's shoulders. "Mila's final wish was for our family to be together again," he said. "Even without her, that wish has come true." The last rays of sunlight caught the medallion on Elena's wrist, making it glimmer like a tiny beacon. A guiding light leading them home. Home to the Cherished Moments Café, where their story, once fractured, had finally come together. A testament to the enduring power of love across time, across tragedy, across every impossible circumstance. At the end of the day, family isn't just about blood, it's about love. About the choices we make to stand by each other, no matter the past. Elena, Grayson, and Robert's story proves that, even through loss, time, and separation, true love always finds its way back. Their journey reminds us that healing is possible, that new beginnings can emerge from the hardest moments, and that the people who truly matter will always find their way home. What about you? Have you ever reconnected with someone in an unexpected way? Or do you have a family story that shaped who you are today? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your experiences.